For the first time in more than 16 years, West Ham United are heading into a summer transfer window without David Sullivan pulling the strings. Love him or loathe him, Sullivan's influence over recruitment has been one of the defining features of the modern West Ham era. Managers came and went, recruitment departments changed shape, scouts arrived and departed, but one constant remained. Major transfer decisions ultimately passed through Sullivan. Now with Sullivan gone from the picture and a new power structure beginning to emerge, this summer could represent the biggest shift in West Ham's transfer strategy since the club moved to the London Stadium. But while many supporters have welcomed the prospect of change, significant questions remain. Who is actually running recruitment, and where is the director of football that was promised? Will Daniel Kretinsky take a more active role, or will Karim Varane be the main perpetrator of transfers? And perhaps most importantly of all, are West Ham about to swap one powerful influence for another, with Nuno and super agent Jorge Mendes potentially becoming the dominant voices behind transfer business? We're looking at what could happen during West Ham's fascinating transfer window in years. Certainly, the end of the Sullivan era is significant. The first thing to understand is just how unusual this summer's going to feel. For well over a decade, Sullivan's fingerprints could be found on virtually every major recruitment decision at West Ham. Managers often spoke publicly about having a say in transfers, but supporters became accustomed to stories involving preferred agents, last-minute opportunities, bargain deals, and ownership intervention. Two names repeatedly associated with West Ham's recruitment over the years were Barry Silkman and Will Salthouse. Whether fair or unfair, many supporters came to believe that certain deals were influenced as much by relationships and agents' networks as they were about long-term strategy. Now that Sullivan's influence is gone, many fans are hoping for a more modern and structured recruitment process. But the problem is that no such structure has yet been publicly confirmed. And this is where the uncertainty begins. So where is this director of football that we've been promised? It's one of the biggest questions that West Ham will face this summer. Who's actually going to make the transfer decisions? For months, there has been discussions about the club appointing a DOF. That need has been obvious for a long, long time. West Ham have suffered through years of inconsistent recruitment. For every success story, there's been several expensive mistakes. The squad remains unbalanced in several areas, particularly following relegation, and a long-term footballing strategy is desperately needed. Yet, as the transfer window approaches, no DOF has been confirmed. That leaves a potential vacuum at the top of the footballing operation. And whenever a vacuum exists, somebody's going to inevitably fill it. Which brings us to Nuno Espirito Santo. Now, it sounds as if, at this moment in time, he's going to have a growing influence on transfers. If there is one person whose influence appears to be increasing, it definitely is Nuno. Following relegation, many expected uncertainty around the manager's future. Instead, the opposite seems to have happened. The club appears committed to backing him. They've said that quite categorically. That could mean something very significant. Without a DOF acting as a buffer between manager and ownership, Nuno could find himself enjoying a level of influence over recruitment rarely seen at West Ham in recent years. And where Nuno goes, discussions about Jorge Mendes inevitably follow. So what about the Mendes factor? Well, we know he's one of the most influential figures football has ever seen. His client list has included some of the biggest managers and players in world football. For years, Mendes and Nuno have worked closely together. Their relationship played a major role in what could be one of the most remarkable footballing projects that England have witnessed in recent times, and that was the transformation of Wolverhampton Wanderers. If you remember, and if you think about what the Wolves blueprint was, it was quite significant. They were promoted to the Premier League under Nuno in 2018 after winning the championship at first attempt. What made their rise so fascinating was the recruitment strategy behind it. Wolves assembled a squad that quite frankly looked stronger than many Premier League teams did, despite being in the Championship. Players with international pedigree arrived in numbers. Several had direct or indirect links to Mendes' extensive footballing network. The likes of Ruben Neves, Diogo Jota, João Moutinho and others helped to transform Wolves from championship contenders into a club capable of challenging for European places. Supporters of that model point to the results. They got promotion at first attempt, they consolidated their Premier League status, they got into European football, and also they had excellent player trading. Significant increases in squad values were realised. Now, critics, however, are going to argue that allowing any single agent to gain too much influence over a club dictates obvious risks. Recruitment can become heavily concentrated within one network. Decision making can become less independent, and the long-term planning can become vulnerable if relationships change. So if Mendes and Nuno become dominant forces at West Ham, supporters will understandably have mixed feelings. But the upside is obvious. Access to players that might otherwise be unattainable, but the downside is equally obvious. Potential over-reliance on one football ecosystem. Now, there's the financial aspect that we've also got to consider. Wolves had an awful lot of money back then to recruit those players. Now, regardless of who controls recruitment, one thing will shape every decision this summer, and that is money. West Ham's reported losses of around 104 million underline the financial challenge that the club faces. Relegation only increases those pressures. Broadcast revenue drops dramatically outside the Premier League. Commercial income, sponsorship income will inevitably be affected. Player wages and the commitments to them remain significant. Even though we hear that some are going to be down by 50%, it doesn't apply to all players. West Ham need to strengthen, that's obvious, but there's a balancing act that remains, and they need to remain financially stable. That is why reports suggesting Daniel Kretinsky may have injected substantial funds into the club has attracted so much attention. Kretinsky has long been viewed as the man most likely to shape West Ham's future in terms of ownership structure. If significant funding has indeed been provided following the latest accounting period, it could ease immediate pressure and provide greater flexibility in the transfer market. Importantly, it could reduce the need for a quick-fire player sale. Because despite widespread speculation, West Ham would rather keep players than sell them where they can. But that doesn't mean that player sales won't happen. We know that that's inevitable. And the two names that keep generating the most attention in the transfer window, or not even open yet, are undoubtedly Fernandes and Somerville. Matthias Fernandes continues to attract interest from clubs across Europe, including the Premier League. His age, technical ability, and development potential make him one of West Ham's most valuable assets. The club would undoubtedly prefer to build around him. The question is whether any interested club reaches a figure that becomes impossible to ignore. Then there's Kretinsky'S Somerville. Despite an injury-hit campaign, there remains considerable admiration for his talent. His profile fits the type of player many clubs seek: explosive, young, capable of producing moments, and genuine quality. If substantial bids arrive, West Ham will face difficult decisions. Other departures should also be expected. I've said the wage bill remains an issue. Several senior players may be moved on as part of a broader squad rebuild. The objective will likely to be to generate funds without dismantling the core team. That's the aim, that's the hope. But what positions need strengthening? Well, I think we all know. Assuming departures are managed carefully, West Ham's recruitment priorities are relatively clear. Is Arce gone? We need a commanding central defender. At least one athletic midfielder if Fernandes goes. Greater pace throughout the squad if Somerville goes, and potentially another striker capable of leading the line in the Championship. Even if Tati stays, we need another striker. Nuno's preferred style demands intensity, physicality, and tactical discipline. Many players inherited from previous regimes do not naturally fit that profile. That means this summer may be less about headline signings and more about finding players specifically suited to the manager's system. The Wolves model demonstrated that kind of approach. Recruitment wasn't based solely on reputation, it was based on suitability. and that may provide clues as to what lies ahead. So what should supporters expect from this transfer window? Perhaps the most important thing is the need to prepare for patience. This is not a normal transfer window. West Ham are operating through a major transition. A new ownership dynamic is taking shape. A new footballing structure is happening at the club. A new reality outside the Premier League has got to be dealt with. And a manager whose influence seems to be growing. And ongoing uncertainty about who ultimately signs the biggest transfer deals in the club also need to be decided. That combination could create a slower start to the summer transfer window than many fans would like, but it could also create an opportunity. For years, supporters complained about a lack of joined-up thinking. This summer offers a chance to build something different. Maybe something more strategic. Maybe something more sustainable. The question is whether the club actually takes that opportunity. I guess only time is really going to tell. So, as West Ham prepare for arguably the most important transfer window in its modern club history, the biggest story may not be which players arrive or depart. It may be who is actually going to be making those decisions. David Sullivan's era is now over. The influence of the likes of Barry Silkman and Will Salthouse has virtually gone. But whether that leads to a modern footballing structure or simply greater influence for Nuno and Jorge Mendes remains to be seen. One thing is certain, the decision made over the next few months will shape not only West Ham's chances of returning to the Premier League, but potentially the direction of the club for years to come. And for supporters watching from the outside, this summer won't just be about transfers, it'll be about discovering who really runs West Ham United now. Look, if you've enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like, hit the subscribe button, and put your comments below. Who would you rather have? Would you rather see Nuno and Mendes leading the way for transfers? Or do you want a director of football in as soon as possible? Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all soon.